translating your brand for global markets. This is a photograph that I took in Beijing at the 798 art area. They've kind of got a place where graffiti is allowed on all the walls for artistic expression. But I think that this image of the American flag turned into noodles and being served up for consumption by some Chinese person, I presume, is kind of apropos. You know, we could say that for those of you who are in this room, let me ask a question. Do you feel that America, where are we at in our peak? Are we still on the way up? Have we hit the peak? Are we kind of past the peak a little bit in terms of our dominance in the world? Where are we at? Anyone? I feel like we've kind of hit the top and we're on the slow decline a little bit in terms of the peak.
I'm just going to say, based on this, it looks like we are seasoning the food of parts of the world that we're being consumed.
Yeah.
So we're adding savor, but we're being consumed.
And excuse me, I do have a cold, and so that's why I'm not shaking hands today, and I have a little cough here and there. I apologize for that, but yeah, I think that this image, there's a lot to be said there. It's a nice interpretation with the savor. I'm not one who is up here to say gloom and doom, it's all over. I just think that sometimes our American attitude of we're it, I don't really care what's going on, we're just fine. That attitude in and of itself is part of the problem, because if you've ever been to China, you know how hard they're working and how fast they're making progress. And we will see some of that. And that's happening all over the world. I was interested to see the projection, the President Obama, as he's preparing to become president, they do this projection looking out 20 years. What does the world look like in 20 years? And that projection said that they see 5 power centers. It's not going to be 1 or 2. It's going to be a diverse set of power centers where you've got China, you've got India, you've got Europe, you've got the United States. It's not that we're going to disappear from the scene, but we're not going to be the dominant player in the future. And with that in mind, we have to think about that. That will change the strategy. That will change the way that we do things. If we keep in mind that we're not on top, that China and other countries are coming up, and they're gonna balance us in power, and there's going to be kind of a different scenario going forward. We could go into that there's lots more there, but I'm going to first go right into a story. I happened to be in Doha, Qatar in November of 2004, and we apologize for the little blurriness. You can get one side clear and the other side won't be. This is the view from my hotel room, and this is the setup for the brand launch for Qatar National Bank over here on the right. On the left is the newspaper announcement. You can't read it, but it says Qatar National Bank launches new corporate image. And I just happened to be there at this time, and it was really interesting to me to see Qatar National Bank go from this, which was very oriented around the power structure. I mean, what is communicated here? It's not highly designed, it's not highly branded, this is not a marketing-oriented organization, but if you look, if you're in Doha, then you see this seal everywhere. It's the seal of the sheikh and the sheikha who are in control of the state of Qatar. Just a few interesting facts about Qatar. The total population of native Qataris is only about 150,000 people, with all that oil and gas. And they have about 600,000 imported workers to make the place run. And everybody in the country gets dividends, like living in Alaska, you live in Qatar, you're a native Qatari, dividends from the oil and gas. It's like a big family organization. And so the Qatar National Bank, very powerful and wealthy, but not really worried about marketing themselves. So while I was there, they launched this. I'm going to fix that. This is the new website, and there are some ads and things that we'll see in a minute. Does anyone here have experience working with marketing communications in the Middle East? I know Scott does over here. There are a lot of do's and don'ts. In Japan, you accept a business card with 2 hands, right? Because you show your whole heart. in the Middle East, one of the big things that if you ever read about marketing communications or visual communication in the Middle East, one of the big things that they always say is don't show the bottom of your foot. This was not designed by a native Qatari. This was designed in Europe somewhere because the Qataris were saying, okay, we want to join the global community. We want to market ourselves to the world of the world out there. We want to make our bank, put it on the world stage. And so we're going to trust somebody. We're going to hire a Western design firm to help us look like we're positioned out there. And I've double-checked this with some friends from the Middle East, and they agree. It's just like you've got the bottom of the foot showing right there. And I suspect that the people who were approving this were like, that doesn't work for me, but you're the experts. I mean, we're talking to an outside audience here, so I guess that's okay. I don't know for sure. I don't know the inside. This is just me observing from the outside. But this is an example where what we want to see is we want to see the Qatar National Bank on the global stage, but we want to see something genuine to them. You know, this was not translated. This brand works for me, I guess. I mean, it kind of makes it look like it's the same, essentially, as every other global bank out there. And so they kind of met the minimum standard. Jeff and I were talking the other day, we gave another seminar about marketing, and there's this funny thing that happens with branding is that people who do branding, they say, I want to look just like my competitor. You know? They feel like it's the entry. I've met the standard. I look like I belong now, so I look just like everybody else. Of course, now you blend in, you look just like everybody else, and it feels like you're just the same as everybody else. What you need to do is meet that standard and then differentiate yourself. I feel like they're at that stage where they're just kind of meeting the standard, joining the global stage. Here's some of the other pieces. These are the full page and part page ads in the newspaper on the day of that launch. And so this is their logo. It's kind of about the idea of focus on the right things. There's all this chaos going on, and here's some focus going on here. There's some nice copy here that you know was written obviously by a Westerner. But this is interesting. This is an English language newspaper. So which way do you read in English language? You read from left to right. In Arabic, you read from right to left. But even in an English language newspaper, which way does growth go? Up to the left for the Qataris. Does that make sense? Huh? No? Harold's shaking his head.
I'm not Qatari.
Doesn't make sense to you. But in Qatar, for a local newspaper and launching, where does growth go? Even in an English language newspaper, that direction of growth is so ingrained and so emotional to them that it's important for them, even in the English language newspaper, growth goes that way. It just feels wrong if it doesn't. And so if you're in Qatar, do as the Qataris do. So this is where the local culture won out. And I went and checked last night to see if they still had the guy with the foot showing, and they don't. This is what it looks like now. And this one's interesting. Looks like he's yawning, like bored. But what you've got now, instead of a Western guy on here, you did have a Qatari here, but a Westerner and some Westerners showing how professional they are. But really, I think they've kind of settled into their own. They've got this international brand. They kind of meet the standard. But what's different about the Qatar National Bank is that it's in Qatar. I mean, you're going to be, this is how they dress, this is how they do business, this is what they prefer. So there is a local, the local customs have come out, and I think they've kind of found their place from viewing it here. I also threw in a couple of different images. I was there with the United Nations. It was the 2004 International Year of the Family, and Richard Wilkins, who's here, was a professor of law at BYU, and he was in charge of it, and that's why I was there with them as a client. This was our host of the government agency, and they took us to a traditional Qatari restaurant, which was beautiful, and the dates and the tea and all the different things laid out for us. These were some other interesting things. In the newspaper, you had prayer timings listed, and in the drawer of my hotel room, in the desk, had a direction of which way was Mecca. And this is a piece of art. I also had a chance to visit a design school there. It was Virginia Commonwealth University. In Doha, they created what they call University City. The Sheikha is a very big advocate of education, and so she created a segmented part of the city for universities, and they went out across the world searching for the best programs. So they say, okay, we want to have that. Who's the best in this? Who's the best in design? And they picked out Virginia Commonwealth University, approached them and said, we'll pay to have you have a program here. And so it's been there since, about 2002, I believe, and going strong. I've had some association with them. And so as I had a tour, it's all women, by the way. All the students are women. They don't want to have the mix of the men and the women. They felt design was appropriate for their daughters to learn. And all these wealthy, spoiled young women go to this school and they graduate and don't go into the field, but they get an education. So this is some of the work that from one of the students, and this is the figure on a crosswalk. So if you're driving down the road and you see a sign that says pedestrian crossing, this is what you're going to see. This is a student's extrapolation of street signs, but I thought that this figure was kind of an interesting cultural icon for Qatar. All right, into the next section, which is I'm going to talk about specifically translating your brand. Obviously, I've kind of laid out that groundwork here. But I need to make it clear that translating the brand assumes that you have a brand. It's just an extension of marketing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here that I'm not going to cover today, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have to have our customer orientation. We have to do research. We have to listen to our customers. We have to be in touch with our customers more now than ever in the past. We have to have a clear brand promise that helps guide our marketing initiative, and we have to be good at delivering on that experience. And what we're going to talk about today is here, which is all in a global context. So what I'm talking about is I'm shorthanding all of this front part of the marketing, and I'm just going to the global context part. Here's a traditional method of international marketing. We've got our own market here. We take our product and we send it out to these markets around the world. And this works and is appropriate for certain kinds of brands. For example, champagne. Champagne, if you're someone who likes champagne and appreciates that, you know that champagne comes from the Champagne region of France. It's an export product, and that's what you buy. You're buying something from the Champagne region of France. If you buy sparkling wine that uses the method champenois and you buy it, it's made in California, it's exactly the same, but they can't call it champagne because it's not from there. So there's a brand that they have established as a region and enshrined in law that they're going to take this product and the ethos and the culture and everything about that region of France is part of the export. And for that product, this is an appropriate method of marketing. You are exporting something that's local and regional. What do we have here in Utah that we export like that? Pardon? Anyone have an idea of what do we market? What do we market like champagne? Tourism, okay. All right. National parks. Exactly. That's one of the things that was on my list. Was the national parks. Arches National Park. That arch is all over the world. People may not even know it's connected to Utah, but that is an iconic image that is pervasive and is out there. And so when people say, I want to go there, and they start looking, it ends up being Utah. So we are exporting our national parks. So tourism. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Wasatch beer.
Wasatch beer. How far does it go?
Wasatch Mountains.
So they export from downtown to Logan. Well, see the local microbrewery thing is a phenomenon. So that's a little bit of a different pattern, where you have this phenomenon that's happening everywhere. It's all about taking in that local flavor. But I'm not sure. There are rare examples maybe where that gets exported as far and wide as champagne does. Julian.
Sorry, the church.
The church. That's a very interesting comment. I didn't prime him.
He didn't. He didn't.
I didn't prime him, but I believe that is one of our major exports as far as brand goes. Worldwide, LDS faith, Salt Lake City. There's really a strong emotional connection, branded connection. There's a magazine called ID Magazine. It's about all kinds of design, and they had an award a few years ago of the top 40 companies in the world or in the United States who are best at branding. So the top 40 best branders, and they included the LDS Church in their list as one of the top 40 most effective at using branding principles in marketing. You had another comment?
I had several products that I think get exported out, although I know most people know they're Utah. Kodiak pancakes, the Honeyville line, the Stevens chocolate, and fry sauce.
So those get exported, but maybe on a different model. So that's interesting, because that's going to take us into the next phase. There are things like, we export a lot of medical products, but do people really connect that with Utah and the location? Different kind of a way of thinking, not necessarily this way, not the same as champagne. We also export brine shrimp. That's one of our big exports, as I understand. And that's on the commodity market. Copper. Nobody has any idea that comes necessarily from Utah.
High School Musical.
High School Musical, does that come from here?
Yes, of course.
All right, I didn't know that. Well, very good. All right, so this is a valid way of marketing, but I think also we kind of fall into a trap with it. And that is that when we do this export marketing, we do what we know how to do. So we're thinking about the champagne model, we're thinking about the Stevens chocolates, we're thinking about all these things, and we think, okay, we're here, we're selling to there. But really what happens is that we end up having a wall, we've kind of got a wall around us, so we don't really see out very well, and then we perceive a wall around each of the places where we're sending it, so we don't see in very well. So what we do is we create things here and we send them there without really understanding that connection. This is the definition of the word foreign. Does that make sense? If you're marketing from the mindset of selling to a foreign market, then this is what you're doing. Foreign, the definition of foreign is, I don't understand that. It's foreign, it's different, it's not me, it's out there. It's something that I don't really understand, it's foreign to me. And so if you're selling to foreign markets, then you're losing out on an opportunity. And there are some, with the, champagne is what you want to do. That you want to understand them. I think the previous one didn't have the barriers, but I think that there's a better way, and that's where we're going to go next. I've developed this model called the Global Zoom, and my recommendation for how one should approach global marketing in the global marketplace, whether it's Stevens chocolates, or whether it's sanitation products, or whether it's instruments, saxophones and trumpets and things like that. With some things, it doesn't really matter where it comes from. It's a product on the market, and you need to have a strong brand. If it makes sense to attach that brand to a location, fine. If it doesn't, then this is the way to approach it. It's more like if I'm shooting pictures with a camera. I have my lens, and I want to take a long lens, I want to see out there, I put the lens on, I take it off, I put a wide angle lens, now I can take different kinds of pictures. This is the way marketing, I think, is generally done. What needs to happen is you need to have a zoom lens. You need to have the capability of zooming in to the local market and zooming out to the global market on an as-needed basis. As I've worked with many companies over the years, from American Express to, I've seen it with Novell, I've seen it with many, many companies. I was at the Association of National Advertisers, which is all the Fortune 500 companies, and I made a presentation to them, and I asked this question. I said, with you here, how many of you have experienced this pattern? You have a vice president, your marketing is focused in the local marketplace. One of the patterns is that you put all the marketing out. I'm going to go back to this one. Say, okay, we've got, I don't know about those markets. I'm just going to let those markets deal with the marketing. So we've got one central budget, but the decisions are made in market. So that's good because it gives good local adaptation. But what tends to happen there is that what's produced here and here and here is different. And so you have no consistency. The biggest example I know of this where it went awry is Yoplait. Yoplait allowed things to develop with their brand in different marketplaces. And so in one marketplace, it's very youthful, it has nothing to do with health, it's kind of cartoony, it's a child's food, kind of like a treat. that it's not for adults, it's for children. But in the United States, it was more of a health food, it was more of a adult food. And then as the global marketplace things tend to spread, and they start to want to do things more centralized, it doesn't work because you've got deeply ingrained perceptions of what this product is in two different places. You can't bring them together without huge expense and a problem. And so you have to think about how this is going to work. If you allow things to develop, that's an extreme example. With American Express, as I began working with them in 1994, I began working in the area of traveler's checks, acceptance marketing. So what we did is we would teach merchants how to accept the traveler's check. We were working on the consumer experience side, not the sales side so much, but teaching. So we wanted the experience of cashing the traveler's check to be the same everywhere in the world. And so when we started, they had this model where they had decisions being made everywhere around the world. Mexico, Germany would do a great job. They did brilliant work. Japan, brilliant work. But in India, the quality wasn't so good and completely different. And you bring all those things together, and the materials were different, the instructions were different, the look and feel was different. And so here's the pattern. I'm going back to my story with the Association of National Advertisers. It swings. It starts on this side, and about every 4 years, the pendulum swings to the other side. You've got a new vice president starts, says, I'm in charge now, we're going to make some differences here. That model is too expensive. We're spending a lot of money duplicating our efforts, having the same thing done in market by market by market. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it all centrally. We're going to control everything from here. We're going to save a lot of money. Do they save a lot of money? Yes. What do they lose? The opportunity, the knowledge of the local market, the adaptation, because everything's the same, so advertising goes out that doesn't necessarily work in those different places. 4 years later, pattern happens again. New vice president, I'm going to make a difference here. Oh my gosh, we are completely not addressing the needs of these markets. We're not adapting. We're going to send the work back out to the local markets, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. So if you take that and put it together into a zoom lens and you build a structure where you have a single decision maker at the global level. This is what we built at American Express. They hired a gentleman, his name was Keith Merrick. They based him in London, and they assigned him to be responsible for acceptance marketing worldwide. And then he had regional people that were responsible for regions: North America, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, JPAA, with Japan, Asia region, etc. And then they worked with the locals down at the individual country level. So they had this structure of communication. And this gentleman from London made a lot of effort going out and building relationships with everyone around the world. And this allowed him to have a discussion on a case-by-case basis to say, here's the project. Is it better to standardize this one and save money, or is this one that needs to go down at the local level? And they could have that discussion, and as our agency, we actually created all these materials for both the global and the local. And here are some examples. So at the global level, we zoomed out. Here's an example of a project we did to educate merchants about how to accept traveler's checks. Here's what the traveler's check looks like. The process is that you watch the person sign and you compare to the original signature. If the signatures match, accept the check. All kinds of problems. People have all kinds of rules and things. We just wanted to make it simple. So we created this campaign with the global market in mind. And it went to 140 markets worldwide. It was produced in between 25 and 30 different language versions. This is the Hong Kong version that's both in traditional Chinese and English with Taiwan and Hong Kong telephone numbers. We've got some different versions here for Korea and I can't remember which ones, Portugal. This one is the Korea one over here. This is UK. And so it's very standardized. The amount of change between one to the other is essentially the language has changed. Right from the beginning, it was designed so that it would work everywhere. We designed it, tested it, sent it out to the markets. Does this work? Got the feedback, said, okay, great. And then we just rolled out all the different language versions. Very, very efficient. Did some printing here in Salt Lake City with Lorraine Press and ganged them all up on, the sheets of paper together. And during the month when we shipped one of these projects out, we were the 3rd largest international shipper in the Utah-Idaho region for UPS. Just for that 1 month. And then we went back down to number 852. So, so very centralized, very efficient, very cost-effective. Great benefits from this because when you have a traveler's check and you travel to a country, you want the same experience no matter where you go. You've got people coming from all different places. You want to standardize that experience so it makes sense. The product is the same, it makes sense. So this is the right thing to do. Here's some others. This is the announcement of the South African Rand traveler's check. And so because it's a Rand traveler's check, we gave it an African feel. And years after this piece went out, we got feedback from the bankers in South Africa, and they just felt like it was brilliant, worked really well. From Linden, Utah, we designed this piece that went to, in this case, 30 different markets. It was probably 8 to 10 different languages, but it really, you know, we were worried that the animal skins would kind of be politically incorrect. We checked with some South Africans, not a problem. You know what I mean? So really, there has to be a dialogue. There has to be. They loved it. They felt like it really represented their language, their culture, and what they were exporting, because that's what we were trying to do. This is a piece. It's the wallet that the traveler's checks actually go in, and so this came from the process of the wallets were generally generic, didn't have any information on them, but they were having trouble educating the consumer about what to expect. So there's, you know, and then we started moving into managing expectations for the consumer about what's going to happen. And then language became a problem. They had a lawsuit where somebody did something with traveler's checks, and American Express said, we're not going to compensate you for that because it's listed in our terms and conditions. And he said, I couldn't read it. It was in English. I'm speaking this language. So we developed a series of wallets that would go to different regions that would be multilingual. In this case, it was Arabic and English. And the thing I love about the Arabic and English and adapting, you know, translating your brand for a global market is that English reads left to right and Arabic reads right to left. And so for both audiences, nobody is second. If this were French, somebody's going to be second. Who's going to be first, the English or the French? Oh my gosh, this is a problem. Send it to France, it's got to be French first, English second, you know what I mean? But that's going to be used in other places. So with most languages, there was a first and a second, but with the Arabic, it was nice because they were both first. And then in here in the middle, you can see that we put the Arabic first. But so this went out in various different languages and was used in lots of markets worldwide. And there are now updated versions of this. This is where the 200 countries comes from, because we developed the wallets. The newest version of the wallets that went out actually went, how many countries are there in the world? Anyone know? Huh? 240. I got 240 here. I need another bid.
FedEx says 231.
You say 231? Okay, guess. These are guesses.
Okay.
It's in the range between 160 and 200. Because it depends on, and is that country independent, or are they a sovereign district of somebody else? And so in the range of 160 to 200 countries per se. And so to get to 200 markets, 215 markets is where this went to. We're talking Cameroon, you know, we're talking pretty much everywhere that these wallets were distributed to. So zooming into the local. This is a piece for the American Express gift card. It's the little gold gift card, and they were launched in the United States and they were launched in Japan. And so very, very different markets. This is on a global basis, something that was done specifically for one market. In Japan, when you give a gift, it's got to be fancy. Culturally, they're very astute to design, and they use a lot of paper to wrap things. So there are layers, and when you open things, you open it, and you open another layer, and you open another layer, and there are beautiful papers that are wrapping it. And so this box we created for that market, and so there's a box, and then inside of the box is a little seated place for the card. These are actually two different ones. This is one that has an envelope and then a card inside, and the box had a couple of layers inside that worked for that market. So again, adapting the brand, adapting the experience, but this was all reporting to one vice president based in London, talking to the local markets, finding out what needed to be done. We didn't travel there, just sharing information through the pipeline of that up and down zoom lens model from a management standpoint, and getting the information and putting the pieces out. Here are some more pieces created specifically around the traveler's checks. This is a part of the launch for the Euro currency traveler's check back in about 1999. And this is a kind of, for Europe, a multilingual market. So this is maybe maybe zoomed part way out, not all the way to the local market, because we're thinking about Europe as a whole, and we're thinking this has to be a little bit more visual, a little less text. The visual of the lock would kind of convey the idea of security, regardless of if someone, is in a German airport and they speak Portuguese, they may not read the German. So we're trying to show the product, convey the idea of security. This would be easily translated for the different places that it could be around the world, and would work well for that European market. Here, this is for merchants in the United States, and was placed in a magazine that went out to merchants. And this won an award without our even applying for it. This magazine did a reader survey about memorability of advertising. And this placed in the top 10% of ads that readers remembered after several months had gone by in reading the magazine. So this one was also done in Spanish for Latin America. And the truth is that people with traveler's checks actually do spend 43% more. So we're trying to educate the merchants as to why they should care about accepting traveler's checks. Another element of doing marketing for multiple countries is you need to understand the different cultures and what some of those things are. And this is a piece that I created based on the work of Gert Hofstede. I know Harold teaches this and had said that his students have studied this. Anyone else familiar with Mr. Hofstede's work? Got one. You studied this, actually. This was one of your PhD thesis was about this, if I remember right. So Gert Hofstede is a researcher based in the Netherlands who in the 1960s worked for IBM. And he did this research study of IBM employees worldwide, trying to understand what are the fundamental differences between cultures. If you really boil them down, are there some predictors that can, some emotional values at the real core that can help you understand what the differences are between the cultures? And he identified these 5 items: power distance, high or low, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term orientation. So I'm not going to go into great detail here, because if you go to my website, which is ChristopherLiechty.com, this is posted there, and there are all sorts of links and information where you can find out more about this. But let me just show you. Power distance, in short, is the distance. If you have a meeting and it's a high power distance organization, the purpose of the meeting is to give instruction. There's no discussion. It's not a time to say, anyone have any ideas? It is, here's how it is, this is what's going to happen. In a low power distance, it's kind of similar, it kind of crosses over with the feminine aspect here, but it's all discussion. It's like, hey, how's it going? What do you think we should do here? And maybe there's so much discussion that nothing ever happens on the extreme. Individualism, we're a highly individualistic country here. Here we are, United States. We're kind of lower on the power distance, high on individualism, kind of a little bit toward the masculine side. Our uncertainty avoidance is not that high. Uncertainty avoidance is, I don't like surprises. If you're in certain cultures, you don't get in without having an appointment because their uncertainty avoidance is high. Even if they have a wide open afternoon, they're not going to give it to you because I don't like surprises. And this also has to do with certain products like bottled water. If I want to be sure that my water is pure, then I'll buy it as opposed to taking a chance that it might be not so pure from a tap. Things like that. And then this is long-term orientation. So here we are on long-term orientation in the United States, kind of low. Let's look at China on long-term orientation. They are so long-term oriented. In fact, this dimension of long-term orientation exists because of China. When Hofstede first did this in the 60s, China wasn't open, and so this dimension didn't exist. But when he went to China and did research, he said, gotta add a dimension because it's so important to them. They're thinking out 50 years, and we're thinking next quarter. All right? They're patient. How does that influence a competitive situation if we're doing business as a country, against China, something like that? I mean, you have to really, they are thinking long term, they're patient, they're willing to wait. So let's look at some of the others. For masculinity and femininity, the Scandinavian cultures, there's no research here, so there's no data, and so it doesn't show up, but the most feminine cultures are the Netherlands and the Scandinavian countries. And it's interesting, there's a good book on this called The Decline of Men by Guy Garcia. and it's just been out the last year. I'm quoted in it in talking about corporations and masculine and feminine dimensions here. But the interesting thing is you've got some culture, some corporate cultures that come from this, such as Nokia, Shell Oil, Philips Electronics, Volvo. These are some powerful global brands, but you don't necessarily think of Shell Oil as being a Dutch company. Does anyone associate that? Because they do a good job at being global. It's not the export model. They're not saying, it's not champagne. They're going out and saying, we're going to listen to everybody. It's not us taking our culture. That's not what it's all about. We're doing business. And if we're going to do business, we're going to adapt to the local marketplace, and it's very much a global brand that they're building, and it influences the way that they do business. The most masculine culture is, if I can click on it here, is Japan. Is that Japan? Did I get it? Nope, up here. There we go. Very masculine. Masculine translates into prestige and competitiveness. That's what masculinity means. Very prestige-oriented, so like Louis Vuitton does very well. You know what I mean? It's like if I've got a Hermes tie on, that makes a difference because I'm telling you something about myself. But also, it's higher toward the power distance a little bit, more collectivist a little bit, very long-term oriented, don't like surprises, but the masculine is the strongest one here.
What about Russia?
You want Russia? Not on this data chart. I think it actually is on the updated one that's on my website. There's a newer one, and I believe Russia is there. Some of these didn't have data, and if you click down in, you can go to Hofstede's sites, and he actually shows you the scores that this is based on. I contacted Hofstede, showed this to him, and got permission from him to use this and post it on the web. Here's one more interpretation of the Hofstede piece. The values that we talked about are right down here in the core. And when you're talking about values, it's hard to measure those. It's hard to figure out what those are. This is where the consumer behavior aspect of marketing comes in. People say one thing and they do another, you know, and so it's kind of hard to figure out where they're at. So Hofstede's values gives you kind of a general broad brush. You can't use it too much in a detailed way, but a good broad brush way to understand the fundamental differences between cultures. But here's an interesting thing. In about 1980, Theodore Levitt was the first one to use the word globalization, as far as I know. And one of the predictions that he made is that as incomes rise around the world, values will converge. People are going to want the same thing. As they make more money, they're going to want more of the same thing. But what we've seen happen is that it did look like that for a while. It appeared that the behaviors around the world, there was a lot of admiration for America. I want what America has. There appeared to be a convergence of values. But as income continued to rise, excuse me, it diverged again. Because the values came through. There was an insecure period in the middle. This is based on the research of Marika, I can't remember her name. Sorry about that, but anyway, she's an associate of Gerrit Hofstede and used the values information to show how later the values became more strongly held. As people became more comfortable, they returned to their core values. So in Sweden, for example, you've got the CEO of IKEA who rides the bus. You know, could he have a chauffeur? Of course he could. Now, he probably has the private jet to get around the country, but the world to visit his different operations. But he still rides the bus every day because that is the value, that is the feminine, everybody's equal kind of value of Sweden. And in other places, you have different things happening based on their values when their money, when their economic level rises. And that's what you're starting to see in China, I think. You're starting to see a disaffection with, America. They've kind of ridden roughshod across the world a little bit, kind of told everybody what to do and don't necessarily keep their own rules, And And that's why everyone's so relieved to have Obama, who listens and talks and is willing. It's a feminine approach versus a masculine approach that we've had over the last 8 years. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about emerging markets, because you've got different levels of markets. In China, you've got at least four tiers of markets that you have to be aware of just in that country. In India, with American Express, they only dealt with the top 1%. They weren't even interested in going beyond. They had to be English speaking and wealthy, and that's who they were interested in. They didn't even want to get down into the local markets. But if, let's say you did, you wanted to sell motorcycles in India. How do you sell motorcycles in the city versus how do you sell motorcycles in the rural parts of India? Does anyone have any idea about this? There's pardon?
A Royal Enfield, the one on the right-hand side.
A Royal Enfield motorcycle?
It's a British-made motorcycle, so it was imported from Britain to India. So it gave to the degree that it was British, then the Indians back in those times equated that it was British as sort of a top-end, high-class vehicle. So that's how they marketed the Royal Enfield.
So, as a farmer, maybe, this is a work tool of carrying things to and from market and whatever, but how does this farmer go out and buy this Royal Enfield imported from Britain motorcycle? Do they go to a dealership? They're living in a village, maybe. Let's talk about the village situation. No. You've got a salesperson who is kind of a local villager who goes, rides the motorcycles out, talks to somebody. You like it? It's yours. How do they pay for it? Monthly payments? Credit plan? Daily payments. Somebody comes around every day and picks up the payment. And where's the bank? The bank is somebody in a hut who's keeping a ledger who's connected with somebody else that goes up the chain, right? Somebody comes around daily and gets a payment. This is according to some friends of mine who own a design firm in India, and in talking with them about it. So it's just, again, adapting your brand, translating your brand for the global markets. If you want to get down into that level, it could be very lucrative. There's a huge market. Pricing is right, the product is good, adapted for their needs. Very interesting. There's a professor actually at Weber State, Dr. Singh, and he has a great case study about doing public service communication to workers in India who are in the jungles and helping them prevent them from getting malaria. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to teach them how to protect themselves, and they did research and found that mosquitoes were only out from dusk until dawn, and they needed, what they decided to do is to create netting that had anti-mosquito chemicals in them. But to convince them to use them, they didn't talk about any of the, like, how malaria works, trying to educate these people about that. It's just, they went to the karaoke clubs and in the little towns where they came out from the forest and they did karaoke songs, and they talked to them about how you're going to get a good night's sleep and how this is going to keep the mosquitoes away from you so you don't have to all night be brushing the mosquitoes off. It's just going to help you get a good night's sleep. Does that make sense? And it worked, and he's got a great case study on that. All right. In May of 2008, last year, coming up next month, a year anniversary, I led a group of designers from the United States, the first trade mission of graphic design from the United States to China that we know of. And we had about 30 people, and we went and visited in various cities, Beijing, Guangzhou, Tianjin, out to Xi'an in the west, and in Hong Kong. And we visited design and advertising firms across the country. It just happened to be, this is in the city of Guangzhou, this is J. Walter Thompson's office there. But we visited, this is a multinational company, local office. We also visited small firms of 5 people. We visited firms of 150 people. I'll show you some of those. This is us at the J. Walter Thompson office. Very high-rise, very modern, and voraciously doing advertising. We just happened to be there. The second day we were there on our trip was the day of the Sichuan earthquake. And we were in this room, and that clock was swaying just a little bit. And we're like, somebody feel that? Feel that earthquake? And it was a couple hours later that our tour guide got a call from her office in Beijing. They had evacuated the building. And it took us a day or two before we really got all the information. But our families were completely panicked. On this side, media everywhere. Over there, we were a little isolated from that, so we didn't really hear it. But that was interesting. This was in behalf of the AIGA Center for Cross-Cultural Design that was mentioned earlier, that I created for international exchange for graphic design. When we were there, we got to visit many of the firms who did design for the Olympics. We got to visit the firm who did the logo for the Beijing Olympics. We got to visit the firm who designed the medals. There was a small shop at a university that designed 80% of the tickets and banners and all the different things that they needed. Excuse me. And it was a fantastic time. Got to learn some amazing things. This is the company, Armstrong International Corporate Identity, that designed the logo. And so we got to sit in their office. It's a small firm, and there were 30 of us, and they shut down for about the 3 or 4 hours because we were sitting in their desks where they were trying to work, and they're giving us a presentation telling us about how they did the logo. It was a big competition. There were thousands of entries for this, and so they all submitted entries, and this company won. Because they won, they will get much, much work in the future because of that. Here are some of the logos for the different parts of the Olympics. Switching gears a little bit, China, no longer just the world's factory. I want to talk in this section about the progress that China has made over the last 20 years. Going from a controlled state economy where most products are produced by the state, probably non-branded, or branded just because of their association, because they come from the most powerful, the best. But in terms of visual design, you know, probably pretty simple. When I was in Taiwan on my mission, I have a funny story of making my own peanut butter. You couldn't buy peanut butter there, but we loved, as Americans, peanut butter. So we buy peanut powder, put it in the blender, add a little oil. Now I know you don't have to do that, but we'd add oil and sugar. And so we kept our sugar in the freezer because there were ants. If you kept the sugar out, you'd have ants all over it. But then, so one day I'm making it, I get the sugar, pull it out, and start pouring it in, and I try it, and it's like really salty. So more sugar, like this. Wow, that's really salty. Turns out the packaging for the salt and the sugar looked the same. So I was dumping cups of salt into this peanut butter. Obviously, I had to throw it out and start over. But that kind of explains the idea of, you know, it's kind of a non-branded commodity. There's not a lot of competition. There's no need for all of that. It's just there. They've gone from that kind of a situation to where they are now competing. So here's kind of a shop. As I talked about, there are several tiers. There's Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou would be kind of the tier 1 markets. Sophisticated, big cities, people who are kind of familiar with Western products. And then you come down to tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities. This is in a tier 2 or 3 city. It's a small city of about 4 million people. And but here in this tier 2 or 3 city, there's much less awareness of Western brands. They still have KFC, they do have McDonald's, but they don't have as much fluidity with English, not so much international exposure. Different products work in different levels in the different tiers within the Chinese market. This is a lamp, and you turn it on right here. So, Chery, who's heard of the Chery automobile? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Chery, apparently the plans for this were stolen from General Motors. There was a factory here, new factory shows up next door, car comes out, everything is identical. New brand, Chinese company. So I guess there was a lawsuit about this, but even so, I think it's important to know that the Chinese are no longer just the world's contract manufacturer. In the contract manufacturing business, what's the name of the game? Price, right? And if it's a price game, if price is what you're doing, then we all know that story. It just goes down, somebody's underbid, somebody's going to underbid, and somebody's going to underbid until quality starts to suffer, until you just can't stay in business. So they're kind of reached the point where they're feeling that. There's a lot of competition. There are a lot of factories in China that will do what you want to do, and somebody's going to do it. So they're just starting now to get into the game of branding for themselves, creating their own brand. The Chery and the Great Wall are two automobiles brands that are just coming out. And maybe the last few years, they don't really see them. We don't see them here in the United States because where are they going? They're exporting this Chery. Where to? Anyone know? Africa. There's a great report, I have it on my blog, from the Financial Times that talks about the story of China going to Africa, because they're both developing countries. They really understand, they really know, the Chinese know how to do business there. The United States and Europe are just baffled by Africa. How do you do business there? You can't sell the products that we make in Africa. You can't take, a Chevy Cavalier or a Ford truck or a Yukon and sell it in Africa. But if you take this Chery and you sell it for about half the price of what a car costs in the United States, and you understand the distribution networks for developing countries and the payment methods like in India, then you do very well. And so there's essentially a void in Africa where the United States and Europe are having a hard time figuring out how to do that market, and China is in there. They're doing a lot of business. They're not worried about coming to the United States. Why would they come to the most competitive marketplace in the world when they can go out to Africa and establish, some territory for themselves? And so I think that applies for many different products, different kinds of brands. And you can find that through my website. If you go to ChristopherLecuture.com, you can go through the blog, and it's down in there. There's a lot of detail. This is another example of a Chinese contract manufacturer developing their own brand. This is called China Wheel. And I was in Guangzhou, I think this is probably 2005, and at a university taking a tour of a design school. Just in terms of design, in the United States we graduate about 40,000 design students in all disciplines per year. In China they are now graduating 1 million design students per year. And they are just building universities like crazy. This is another place called University City, and it's in Guangzhou on the island in the Pearl River. And the government bought this island, knocked down all the factories, and built 10 universities from scratch. No professors to teach in them yet, but they have the students, and they've changed their model. It used to be in China to get an education you had to test, and only the best got into education, the rest had to go find something else. Now China wants to allow anybody who wants to get an education to get an education, and they're building universities like crazy. This is an example. This is the Guangzhou Academy of Arts, and several thousand students. And China Wheel came to the Guangzhou Academy of Arts and had a design contest for wheels. And so they had students do designs, and then they had a competition. And this celebration is the result of the competition. These are the finalists, and what they're going to do on this day is they're going to announce the winner who's going to get some prize. Rock band, Western, indie rock, actually, band playing up there. Chinese guys playing American indie rock style stuff up there, and you've got a Hummer, and you've got China Wheel making their own designs. Let me see if I can go back and see. This one right here is based on a Chinese chop, and it's got dragon images. I'm sorry, it's kind of a little bit hard to see it in here, but this wheel is one of the winners, and it's based on the dragon motif. Very Asian, very Chinese. Are they just making what we make? They're going to be competing with us. They're doing this to put products on the market to be competing in the world marketplace. Now I'm going to move to more generally the graphic design and advertising industry. This logo design was done by a company called Bong Design. This is one of the companies that we visited. They have about 150 employees, and in China it's a little bit different than in the United States. In the United States we're more segmented. We've got advertising agencies. Am I time's up? It's 1:30. I'm going on and on. All right, keep going. Anybody want to leave? We segment the industries. It's more about relationship there. And so once a client is working with an agency, they want that agency to take care of everything. So they start with one thing, and they end up doing industrial design and advertising and graphic design and interactive work. And so these agencies just explode And this one was based in a junior high, in one wing of a junior high. So they had 2 floors, an entire wing, and the rest of the junior high had students in it. And here's this design firm of 150 people cranking out China National Peking Opera Company. And this is the way it works there. Everyone wants to go to the expert. This is the one exception in the advertising industry where you've got a specialist. Although they did do everything, but they're kind of known for their branding. They get the contract to do the logo for China Telecom. Everybody in the telecom industry now wants to work with this design firm because they're the experts. They're the ones who have the contacts. They know it. And so when they land it, then everything in that industry starts to fall into place. That's their slide showing, this is the Cherry. They designed the Cherry logo. And then they start to get other car companies coming down. I think Great Wall is here.
No conflict of interest issues.
Well, what they say is in the, is there a conflict of interest in that? And they say, we're just designing the logo. If we were doing advertising, there would be a conflict of interest, but we're doing the identity design, and they don't feel in that field that there would be a conflict of interest. So I did ask that question. Jim?
Do they have a similar competitive bid process?
Probably a free competitive, yeah, probably. Yeah, very much a competitive kind of a thing. This is the M building. I don't know if you've seen that. They did the signage for that. And I'll just go quickly. This is an advertising competition to encourage Chinese designers to incorporate their own culture. There's still a tendency, they're not quite mature in the industry, they still look to the West as the standard, wanting to copy and imitate. And there's a huge initiative to help them build their own culture. And what's our own style? And so this competition, Chinese Element, is meant to give awards to those pieces that feature the Chinese element, and they invited me as a judge, and I took my son Carl that time as a guest, and we were judges. Here's one example.